My name's Robert Johnson. I am 62 years old, a retired architect who spent most of his life drawing lines, planning foundations, and believing that if a structure was solid enough, nothing could make it collapse. Life has a way of proving otherwise. I built houses that still stand strong across 3 states, but I couldn't stop the one I shared with my wife from crumbling when she got sick. After she passed, the quiet of the evenings grew so thick it felt like dust settling over blueprints I could never finish. I raised 2 children on my own. Ezra, my oldest, found his place in Seattle and built a good life for himself. Jade stayed close. She worked in marketing and carried herself with that confident grace her mother used to have. When she laughed, it filled the room the same way her mother's laughter used to. For years, I told myself that as long as Jade was happy, I would be fine. When she told me she'd met someone, a man named Ethan Moore, I smiled and tried to mean it. The first time Ethan walked through my front door, I remember the way the evening light hit his face. He had one of those smiles that seemed to stretch wider than it should, like it had been practiced in a mirror. He looked like someone out of an advertisement. Clean suit, neat hair, and a handshake that lasted 1 second too long. Jade glowed beside him, nervous and proud. I wanted to believe he was the one who would finally bring laughter back into our home. We sat down to dinner. The house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, a recipe my wife had perfected. The sound of silverware tapping plates filled the pauses between our small talk. Ethan complimented everything. He praised the seasoning, admired the furniture, even mentioned how cozy the lighting was. For a while, I almost let myself relax. Then he asked how long it had been since my wife passed. When I said 8 years, he nodded slowly and asked whether her life insurance had helped us during that time. He was the kind of question that didn't belong at a dinner table. Jade froze for a second, then tried to laugh it off. I gave a polite answer, something vague about being comfortable. He pressed on, talking about investments and how important it was to make money work for you. His tone was smooth, but calculated. I'd met enough clients in my career to recognize when someone was testing for weak spots. Later that night, after they left, I stayed in the dining room, rinsing plates that were already clean. I thought about how Ethan's eyes had wandered around the room when he spoke, scanning everything like a man studying blueprints. It wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. I told myself I was being paranoid, but instincts are funny things. They whisper, even when logic tells you to stay quiet. I sat down with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and looked at the family photos on the mantel. My wife's smile in the frame reminded me of something she used to say. Some walls protect, but some walls imprison. I realized that my silence might soon become one of those walls if I didn't trust what I felt. When I shook Ethan's hand that evening, as he and Jade were leaving, his grip was firm, confident, and just a little too measured. It was a handshake that told me he was performing, not connecting. As I watched them walk down the path, the porch light caught his face. His smile stayed perfect, but it didn't reach his eyes. And that, more than anything he said, made me uneasy. Ethan started showing up everywhere, Sunday dinners, backyard barbecues, even helping Jade hang the new curtains she bought for my living room. It was like he had quietly moved into our routines without ever asking. At first I told myself it was a good thing. My daughter deserved someone reliable. But the more I watched him, the more I saw the cracks that polite smiles can't cover. He always found a way to bring up money, steering conversations toward real estate, stocks, or family finances. When I asked casual questions about his job, his answers sounded like lines from a brochure. One night after they left, I sat at my desk with the glow of my laptop lighting up the dark. I typed his name into every search engine I knew. Nothing real came up. No business records, no LinkedIn page, just scattered mentions that didn't match his story.
My stomach tightened as I scrolled. I'd handled countless project contracts in my life, but never seen someone so well hidden behind clean paper. I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Dean Carter, who used to work private investigations after retiring from the force. We met the next morning at a small diner off the highway. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air as I slid a printout of Ethan's photo across the table. Dean studied it and asked what made me suspicious. I told him everything, the charm, the missing records, the way he looked at my house as if pricing it. Dean nodded slowly. He said people like that don't chase love. They study targets. They learn what you want to hear and mirror it until you trust them. Then they take what they came for. I asked what I should do. Dean looked out the window before answering. He said staying silent might keep the peace for now, but silence was also the soil where lies grow fastest. On my drive home, his words sat heavy on my chest. The mountains looked sharp against the winter sky, and the air felt colder than usual. I thought about Jade's laughter, how she had started to sound lighter since Ethan came around. What if I was wrong? What if I shattered that joy for nothing? But what if I was right? What if I stayed quiet and she lost everything? That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the hallway and stopped by her old room, still painted in pale blue. I told myself I would find out who Ethan really was, no matter how long it took, even if it meant she'd never forgive me. Sometimes protecting someone you love means becoming the villain in their story, at least for a while. I turned off the light knowing my search had just begun. I found out about the money on a Sunday morning. Jade came over for coffee, bright and full of plans. Her voice light as she talked about the wedding colors and the menu. Somewhere in the middle of her excitement, she mentioned how Ethan had helped her invest her inheritance into a private real estate development in Colorado Springs. She said it like she was proud of herself. I remember the sound of the spoon hitting my mug, a sharp, metallic ring that didn't stop echoing. I asked how much she invested, and when she said all of it, my chest went cold.
That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, running my hand along the window frame, trying to make sense of what to do. Fear and fury kept trading places inside me. I called Dean and told him everything. He said he'd dig deeper. While I waited, I decided to test Ethan myself. The next evening, when he came over, I mentioned I was thinking about selling my old mountain cabin, the one my wife and I built with our own hands before the kids were born. I said the market was strong and that it might be worth around $700,000. Ethan's eyes shifted just for a second, but I caught it. His tone changed too. Suddenly he had advice about capital gains, property taxes, and reinvestment strategies. He spoke like a man already counting my money. That was all the confirmation I needed. After they left, I sat in the dark, the sound of the wall clock ticking louder than usual. It was like the house itself was waiting for what came next. Dean called the following day. His voice was tight. He said he'd traced multiple accounts under Ethan's name and 2 fake identities, both linked to small offshore banks. He'd found no registered business licenses and a paper trail that screamed fraud. He told me I was dealing with a professional, someone who knew how to disappear the moment things got risky. My hands trembled when I hung up. I called Detective Olivia Reyes that night. She listened carefully as I explained what we'd found. She told me to gather evidence, stay calm, and not confront Ethan yet. We both knew the wedding would be the perfect stage if things went wrong. The plan started to form in my head. I hated it, but I couldn't see another way. By midnight, the house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the old floorboards under my feet. I walked into Jade's room where her wedding dress hung by the window, catching a sliver of moonlight. I whispered into the empty air that I hoped she would forgive me someday, even if she never understood why I did it. Then I turned off the light and waited for morning, knowing the storm was already moving in. The morning of the wedding was brighter than I expected. The sky over Aspen Falls was sharp blue, the kind of day that looked like it belonged on a postcard.
The church sat on a hill overlooking the valley, white stone glowing under the sun. People moved in quiet excitement, dressed in pastels, carrying small bouquets, whispering about how beautiful the bride was. I stood near the front steps, shaking hands and smiling, but my thoughts were nowhere near calm. I kept hoping I was wrong, that the recording Dean had pulled from Ethan's phone meant nothing. Still, the voice I'd heard the night before kept looping in my mind. The words slick and cold, talking about Jade's inheritance like it was loose change. Inside, the church smelled of polished wood and lilies. The air was heavy with perfume and anticipation. I took my seat near the front pew and glanced at the clock. It was 10:45 in the morning. Every minute crawled by. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow at first, then faster each time the doors opened. Ezra sat beside me, straight-backed and restless. He leaned in once, whispering that everything would be fine. I nodded, pretending to believe him.
When the music started, everyone rose. Jade stepped through the double doors on her godfather's arm, a soft light surrounding her like a halo. She looked radiant, alive with joy, and for a brief second, I felt guilt pierce through me. What if I ruined her happiness for nothing? But then I saw Ethan standing at the altar, his expression perfectly composed, that same practiced smile that never touched his eyes. The ceremony began. The pastor's voice filled the room, steady and kind. Vows were exchanged, and Ethan's words flowed smoothly. Too smoothly. I knew performance when I saw it. Jade's voice trembled with emotion, genuine and trusting. I gripped the small speaker in my jacket pocket and felt its weight like a stone. When the pastor said the familiar line about anyone who objected, I felt the world narrow. The air thinned. My hands moved on their own. I stood up and pressed play. The church went still, except for the faint hum of feedback from the small speaker. Then Ethan's voice filled the space, confident and cruel. He talked about the wedding as a transaction, Jade's inheritance as his new income, and me as the old fool who didn't see it coming. Gasps rippled through the room like wind through leaves. Jade froze at the altar, her bouquet trembling. Ethan turned toward me, his face pale, but his eyes still sharp. He said I misunderstood, that it was a joke, that someone was trying to ruin him. But when the recording kept going, his own laughter drowned his excuses. He took a step forward, anger twisting his features. The crowd backed away as Detective Reyes stood up from the end pew, 2 officers moving beside her. For a second, time stopped. Then Ethan ran. The sound of his shoes echoed down the aisle. Outside, sunlight exploded off the glass doors as the officers followed him. The guests turned in shock as shouting erupted from outside. I didn't move. Jade dropped her bouquet, petals scattering across the floor. Ezra rushed to her side, his arm around her shoulders, whispering something I couldn't hear. The pastor called for calm, his voice shaky. The church doors opened again, and Detective Reyes walked back in. Her uniform was neat, her expression unreadable. She said quietly that Ethan Moore was in custody. I nodded once, unable to speak. My throat felt like it had closed. Jade looked at me, her eyes full of confusion and betrayal. She asked if I had known. I told her yes. She asked why I didn't warn her sooner. I said I wanted proof, that love makes people deaf until truth is loud enough to hurt. She started crying, silent tears that hit the white of her dress. Ezra,
As we left the church, sunlight hit my face again, bright and unforgiving. I thought about what boundaries really meant, how hard it is to draw a line in love. The sound of those handcuffs stayed with me long after the noise faded. To me,
it was the sound of boundaries being restored. 6 months later, the world had grown quiet again. Aspen Falls was covered in early spring light, and the noise of that day had faded into something distant. Ethan was serving his sentence in state prison, and the newspapers had stopped calling. Life had found its slow rhythm again. Jade was back at work, taking walks in the evenings, learning to live without looking over her shoulder. There were still days when she woke up with tears in her eyes, but they came less often now. One morning, I received a letter with a correctional facility stamp. It was from Ethan. He wrote about growing up in foster care, about never knowing stability or love that lasted more than a season. He said he was not asking for forgiveness, only understanding. He wrote that people like him learn to lie before they ever learn to trust. I read the letter twice, feeling a mix of anger and something that felt like pity. Monsters are not always born. Sometimes they are built from neglect. I did not respond, but I did not throw it away either. I folded it and put it in a drawer. A week later, Jade told me she wanted to forgive him, not to excuse him, but to free herself. She said forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant no longer carrying the weight of someone else's choices. Ezra nodded quietly, proud of her strength. That weekend, the three of us drove up to the old mountain cabin. The roof needed patching, and the wood smelled of pine and dust. Sunlight spilled across the porch as we worked side by side. For the first time in a long while, the silence between us felt peaceful. As I watched my children rebuilding what time had worn down, I thought about all the foundations in life that must be repaired after betrayal. Some cracks stay visible, but they remind us of what held. Forgiveness, boundaries, and self-respect. That is how you rebuild after someone tries to break you. That is how you start again.